We begin the day with a former U.S. president who sat back and did nothing as his foot soldiers came close to hanging the vice president and killing democracy in the process. And with that dramatic description, U.S. lawmakers last night began presenting their evidence and their case against Donald Trump. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol held its first public hearing on Thursday evening, a prime-time presentation of what it has discovered over the past year. That former President Trump incited the violence that day in an attempt to hold on to power, and that he did nothing to pull back the mob, even when it became clear that the vice president was a target for murder. Here are some of the highlights from last night's hearing.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup, a brazen attempt, as one rioter put it shortly after January 6th, to overthrow the government. The violence was no accident. We're going to remind you of the reality of what happened that day.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit.
And Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country.
And aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, "Maybe our supporters have the right idea."
Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets!
President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack.
I am not allowed to say what's going to happen today because everyone's just going to have to watch for themselves. But it's going to happen.
I documented the crowd turn from protesters to rioters to insurrectionists. I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity.
Cruiser 5 to 50 be advised, Capitol Police 1 advised they're trying to breach and get to the Capitol.
What I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I had seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, they were bleeding, they were throwing up. I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
They were peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love, the love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
But our work must do much more than just look backwards. Because of our democracy remains in danger, the conspiracy to thwart the will of the people is not over.
That was what was presented last night. DW Washington correspondent Sumi Sumasconda, she watched yesterday's primetime event, and I asked her how many other Americans tuned in.
Well, we have some numbers that have come in that have shown that the ratings were relatively good for all of the major networks that showed, mainstream networks, I should say, that showed the hearings live on TV. There were concerns that people would not be interested in watching this coverage because it has been 2 years. People believe the country has moved on. But as I said, this was very compelling evidence to be watching, extremely effective storytelling. For those who are paying attention to the hearings, Democratic voters, it is likely they will continue to watch. But I should note, Brent, that Fox News did not cover this hearing. They put it on Fox Business, which has much lower viewership. They called it a show trial. They didn't show any clips of the violence. So for the many Americans who watch Fox News, they were not getting the same coverage. And that's important because that means it was not reaching a large number of Americans.
That was Sumi Sumasconda reporting there from Washington. My first guest tonight is a former White House insider. Richard Painter was the chief ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush. He's now a professor of corporate law at the University of Minnesota. Professor Painter, it is good to see you again, unfortunately under these circumstances, but I have to throw it at you. The hearing that took place last night, it took place during prime time. The expectations were high. Did the committee deliver?
Well, the committee exposed the facts, at least some of the facts, about January 6th and the insurrection. A lot of these facts we already knew, but we saw video coverage of the insurrection that we had never seen before. And also testimony from the Attorney General of the United States, the former Attorney General William Barr, who explicitly told President Trump that he had lost the election and that he did not have a legal ground to stand on challenging the election results. And that is, of course, what instigated all of this, President Trump's effort over 2 months to overturn the results of an election when those results were really quite clear. This was a very dramatic hearing, for sure. But ultimately, the question is going to be whether former President Trump or anyone else high up in the White House will be held responsible legally for what happened, or whether the effect of the hearing is just political. And that actually has its value as well. If the Republican Party makes the wise decision, I hope they will make, that somebody else should run for president in 2024, not Donald Trump.
Well, Professor, would that be the best outcome to come from this investigation, that Donald Trump never runs for president again? Or let me ask you, as a legal mind, would you think it would be prudent for the Justice Department to pursue charges against Donald Trump, to put a former U.S. president on trial?
If he committed a crime, he should be held accountable for any crimes he committed that he could be shown to have committed. Now, that would have to be shown beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal trial. But there is overwhelming evidence that former President Trump engaged in election fraud when he sought to induce the Secretary of State of Georgia to just come up with 11,000 votes. And that's a tape-recorded conversation. It's also quite clear that President Trump put enormous pressure on federal employees, including the Attorney General and others, to reverse the results of the election. And it is a crime, a federal crime in the United States, for anyone to seek to coerce or order a federal employee to engage in partisan political conduct. And a lot of the interaction between Donald Trump and the Justice Department appears to be just that, the president seeking to coerce the Justice Department into writing an opinion letter that election was invalid. So that's very troubling, and former President Trump could be charged under the political coercion statute. More difficult, of course, will be showing a direct connection between Donald Trump and the violent insurrection. We do have his words inciting the crowd to march on the Capitol. He didn't specifically tell them to break in or to kill a police officer or to engage in other violence, although that could be insinuated from his words. But a criminal charge relating to the insurrection itself might or might not succeed.
If I'm understanding you right, it's going to be easier than to disqualify Donald Trump as a political candidate in the future than it would be perhaps to prosecute him successfully for inciting the January 6th insurrection. Is that correct?
It might be. We don't know all of the facts yet connecting Donald Trump with the actual insurrection and what he knew about that crowd when he sent that crowd in. He did tell them to go to the Capitol. That's quite clear. The question is whether he knew that they were going